"You're just a useless old woman, Mom." Those were the words my son spoke to me the night he threw me out of the penthouse, the home I'd lived in for 15 years. I was 68 years old. My husband Robert had died just 3 weeks earlier, and according to his will, my son Jonathan inherited the $4 million apartment and a $3 million investment portfolio, while I, the wife who'd sacrificed 42 years, received only a rusty key to a garage in the industrial district. A garage, not a home, not money, just an old building at 1420 Industrial Parkway that I'd never heard of. Jonathan thought that was the best Robert could do for a useless old woman like me. But I didn't know that behind that garage door was a secret that would change everything. A secret about the red-haired woman in an old photograph, a woman my husband never mentioned. A secret about my son, the child I thought was mine for 43 years. A secret about $13 million hidden in vintage cars. And a secret about what inheritance truly means, not what you're given, but what you choose to do with it. If you want to know how a garage key unlocked not just millions of dollars, but an entire new life, a life I never dared dream of at 68, stay with me. Because this isn't just a story about inheritance. This is a story about finding yourself when you thought everything was lost. And if this story touches you, please like and subscribe, because this is only the beginning. But first, let me take you back to Attorney Hoffman's office, where it all started to fall apart. The attorney's office reeked of leather and old money, the kind of place where fortunes changed hands with the whisper of paper and the scratch of expensive pens. I sat in a chair that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, my hands folded in my lap, trembling slightly despite my efforts to appear composed. Thomas Hoffman, 70 years old with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, adjusted the documents before him. Behind his mahogany desk, Los Angeles sprawled beneath us through floor-to-ceiling windows, 30 stories of glass and steel and carefully cultivated prestige. 3 weeks. Robert had been gone only 3 weeks, and already I felt like a stranger in my own life. Beside me, Jonathan shifted in his tailored suit. My son, 43 years old, successful in commercial real estate, wearing the same expression he'd had since childhood when anticipating a gift restrained excitement, poorly masked by solemnity. Before I begin, Hoffman said, his voice carrying that particular tone attorneys use when they're about to deliver bad news disguised as legal necessity, I want to assure you that everything here is legally binding and precisely as Mr. Campbell instructed. I should have recognized his statement as the warning it was. The reading passed in a blur of legal terminology, but certain phrases cut through the fog of my grief with devastating clarity. To my son, Jonathan Campbell, I leave our penthouse residence in Los Angeles valued at approximately $4 million, along with my primary investment portfolio currently valued at $3.2 million. I watched Jonathan's face. His jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded, accepting what he clearly viewed as his due, the inheritance he'd been expecting. The validation he'd been waiting for. And to my beloved wife, Susan Campbell, I leaned forward slightly, expecting to hear about our shared savings, perhaps the small cabin in Big Sur we'd talked about retiring to. Robert and I had dreamed about that cabin, morning coffee, watching the fog roll in from the Pacific afternoons, reading on the deck evenings by the fireplace. I leave the property located at 1420 Industrial Parkway, the garage and its contents. Silence filled the room like water rushing into a sinking ship. The words didn't make sense. I heard them, but my brain couldn't process their meaning. A garage. Robert had left me a garage. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice sounding distant and thin as if someone else were speaking through me. "Did you say a garage?" Hoffman's expression held something I couldn't quite read, pity perhaps, or discomfort. He wouldn't meet my eyes directly. "Yes, Mrs. Campbell. A commercial garage property in the industrial district. Approximately 2,000 square feet. 2,000 square feet of concrete and oil stains and God knows what else. That was what 42 years of marriage had earned me." Jonathan's hand found my shoulder, squeezing slightly too hard. The gesture might have looked comforting to Hoffman, but I felt the possessiveness in it, the claim of ownership. "Don't worry, Mom," he murmured loud enough for Hoffman to hear. "I'll make sure you're taken care of." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like hands pushing me underwater. 42 years of marriage. 42 years of making Robert's coffee exactly how he liked it, 2 sugars, splash of cream served in the blue mug he preferred. 42 years of listening to his stories about vintage cars and architecture, of building a life together in the city we both loved. 42 years of being his partner, his companion, his wife. And he'd left me a garage. I barely heard the rest of the reading. Something about the property being fully paid utilities, current a key waiting for me at Hoffman's office. Jonathan received detailed instructions about managing his portfolio contacts for financial advisors, a letter from Robert about stewardship and responsibility. For me, there was only a key and an address I'd never heard of. Mrs. Campbell, Hoffman extended a small manila envelope across his mahogany desk. His hand was steady, but I noticed he still wouldn't quite look at me. The property key and documentation. I took it with numb fingers. Through the envelope, I could feel the shape of a single key, old-fashioned and heavy. The kind of key that might open a padlock on a chain-link fence. The kind of key that represented everything I'd apparently meant to my husband. If you have any questions about the property, Hoffman continued shuffling papers as if eager to be done with this uncomfortable meeting. I'm afraid I can't be of much help. Your husband was quite private about this particular asset. He handled all arrangements personally. Private, that word would come to mean so much more than I understood in that moment. Outside Los Angeles spread beneath us in a glittering sprawl of afternoon sunlight and smog. The city looked the same as it had 3 weeks ago before Robert died, before my world ended. But everything felt different now, tilted somehow like a painting hung slightly crooked. Jonathan walked me to his car, a sleek black Mercedes he'd bought 6 months ago, the kind of car that announced success and ambition. His hand remained on my elbow as if I were fragile breakable, or perhaps as if he were steering me, controlling my direction. I don't understand, I said as he opened the passenger door for me. Why would Robert do this? Jonathan's face, so much like his father's in structure but lacking Robert's warmth, settled into an expression I'd seen increasingly over the past decade. The look he wore when explaining complex real estate deals to people he considered less sophisticated. The patient condescension of someone who believed he knew better. Dad was old school Mom. He probably thought I should inherit the valuable assets since I know how to manage them. He closed my door and walked around to the driver's side, sliding behind the wheel with practiced ease. The garage is just, I don't know, maybe he had sentimental attachment to it. You know how he was about cars. But I didn't know. That was becoming horrifyingly clear. Robert had loved cars the way most men his age loved golf or fishing as a topic of conversation, a source of nostalgia. Something to discuss over dinner to point out on the street. We'd owned sensible vehicles. A Camry, a Lexus in our better years. Never anything that would require a private garage. Never anything that suggested the kind of passion that would lead a man to secretly purchase a 2,000-square-foot building. Where am I supposed to live? The question escaped before I could stop it, raw and small. Jonathan pulled into traffic, his eyes on the road ahead. The late afternoon sun glinted off the buildings around us, turning glass into mirrors, creating a city of reflections. Well, the penthouse is mine now. It's in the will. He paused, and I heard him choose his next words carefully. I'm sure we can work something out. Maybe Aunt Helen has room, or there are some nice senior communities. Senior communities. I repeated the words flatly, letting him hear how they sounded. Independent living facilities, he corrected as if the euphemism made it better, as if pretty words could disguise the reality of what he was suggesting. You'd have your own apartment activities, people your own age. It might be good for you, actually. Social. You've been isolated since Dad got sick. People my own age, as if 68 meant I was ready to be warehoused with other inconvenient elderly parents. I still hiked. I volunteered at the library. I'd been planning to travel now that Robert's health issues had resolved, except they'd resolved by his death, not his recovery. The penthouse, our penthouse, the home Robert and I had shared for 15 years, rose before us all glass and steel and carefully cultivated prestige. Jonathan pulled into the underground garage, parking in Robert's assigned spot with an ease that suggested he'd already claimed it as his own. The presumption of it struck me like a physical blow. I'll help you get your things together, he said, pocketing his keys that now included access to what had been my home. I have meetings tomorrow, so it would be best if you could clear out anything personal tonight. I stared at him, searching his face for some sign of the boy I'd raised. The child who'd cried in my arms after falling off his bicycle. The teenager who'd needed me when his first girlfriend broke his heart. The young man who'd called me from college homesick and uncertain. That boy seemed to have vanished, replaced by this stranger who spoke of clearing me out as if I were clutter to be removed. Tonight, my voice came out smaller than I intended. Mom, his tone sharpened with impatience, the same tone I'd heard him use with subordinates who didn't grasp instructions quickly enough. The penthouse is mine now. I need to start making changes, and I can't do that with all your stuff everywhere. Your stuff. As if our life together, Robert's and mine, was just clutter interfering with his renovation plans. I followed him into the elevator, watching the numbers climb to the 32nd floor. The ride felt longer than usual, each ascending floor marking my distance from the ground, from stability, from everything I'd thought was certain. The elevator doors opened onto our know-his floor. The penthouse opened before us unchanged, yet utterly transformed by context. Everything looked exactly as it had this morning, exactly as it had for 15 years, but now it all belonged to someone else. The furniture Robert and I had chosen together, the cream sofa we'd found at an estate sale, the teak coffee table he'd refinished himself. The photographs from our travels Venice-Paris that week in Santa Fe, where we'd bought the small watercolor that hung above the fireplace. The throw pillows I'd selected last month, thinking we'd have years more to enjoy them. All of it now belonged to my son, who was already measuring spaces with his eyes, mentally redecorating, erasing us from the space we'd created. I've got boxes in the study, Jonathan said, heading down the hallway without waiting to see if I followed. Take whatever's personal to you. The furniture stays. I'll be having designers in next week anyway. I stood in the living room surrounded by 42 years of accumulated life and tried to determine what was personal. The coffee table Robert had spent 3 weekends refinishing, the painting we'd bargained for in Santa Fe, the artist working from a street corner, the small ceramic bowl that held my reading glasses made by a friend who died 5 years ago. How do you dismantle a marriage in a single evening? How do you decide what memories you're allowed to keep? I started in the bedroom, folding clothes with mechanical precision. My hands knew what to do, even as my mind struggled to catch up with reality. Blouses, slacks, the blue dress I'd worn to Robert's funeral, the black shawl I'd clutched during the service, its soft wool absorbing my tears. Robert's clothes still hung in his closet suits, arranged by color shirts, organized by sleeve length. The meticulous organization he'd maintained even as his illness progressed. I couldn't bring myself to disturb them. Let Jonathan deal with that. Let him box up his father's sweaters and shoes. Let him feel the weight of erasing someone from the world. At the back of my closet, behind a garment bag containing my winter coat, I found Robert's old messenger bag. The leather was worn soft with age, the strap darkened where it had rested against his shoulder for years. He'd used it constantly before switching to a briefcase, and I'd kept it out of sentiment, unable to throw away something so marked by his daily use. Inside, tucked into the small interior pocket, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in Robert's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The paper was good quality, slightly yellowed as if it had been sealed for some time. Robert's handwriting filled the single page, the familiar loops and slants that I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards and love notes left on the kitchen counter. Susan, if you're finding this, it means I'm gone and you've come back to the penthouse for your things. I'm sorry for what you're going through. I'm sorry for the confusion and pain my will has caused. But please, before you judge my choices, go to the garage. Everything will make sense there. Trust me one more time. All my love, Robert. I read the note 3 times, searching for hidden meaning in the familiar script. The garage. He wanted me to go to the garage. Trust me one more time. As if trust were something I could still afford to give. Mom! Jonathan appeared in the doorway, checking his watch, an expensive Rolex that had been a gift from Robert 5 years ago. How's it going? I need the bedroom cleared by morning. The designers want measurements. Something in me crystallized, then hardening from liquid grief into solid anger. It wasn't hot anger, the kind that explodes and burns. It was cold anger, the kind that freezes and preserves, that remembers everything. I'm leaving now, I said, standing. I'd packed 1 suitcase with clothes, toiletries, a few photographs. Everything else could wait or burn for all I cared. Okay, good. Jonathan's relief was palpable. So you'll stay with Aunt Helen? I'll figure it out. His eyes narrowed, slightly suspicious of my tone. Mom, don't be dramatic. I'm just trying to move forward like Dad would have wanted. You're just a useless old woman, Mom. The words came out quiet flat. What would you even do with a real inheritance? Dad knew that. Wait, I hadn't said that. He had. The words had come from Jonathan's mouth an hour ago downstairs in the garage when I'd asked if we could at least wait a few days before I moved out. When I'd asked if there was any room for negotiation, any consideration for the fact that I was grieving too. I'd been so shocked I'd almost convinced myself I'd misheard. But looking at his face now defensive, irritated with no trace of remorse, I knew I'd heard correctly. And I knew that this was who my son had become. Someone who could call his mother useless. Someone who could throw her out of her home without a second thought. "I'll be gone in 5 minutes," I said, pulling my suitcase toward the door. "Mom, wait. Goodbye, Jonathan." I didn't look back. The industrial district looked different at night. Warehouses loomed against the dark sky, their windows empty eyes, watching my old Camry navigate streets I'd never driven before. The GPS on my phone directed me with dispassionate efficiency. "In 500 feet, turn right. Your destination is on the left." 1420 Industrial Parkway was exactly as unpromising as I'd imagined. A low, single-story building with a rolling metal door. The kind of place you'd expect to find abandoned tools and oil stains. Graffiti tagged one corner angular letters spelling something I couldn't read in the dim streetlight. A chain-link fence surrounded what might have once been a parking area, now cracked asphalt and weeds pushing through. I sat in my car for a long moment, the key from Hoffman's envelope heavy in my hand. This was what my husband thought I deserved. This was what 42 years of marriage had earned me. The anger I'd felt in the penthouse drained away, leaving only exhaustion, and a grief so profound it felt like drowning. Like being pulled under dark water lungs, burning, unable to find the surface. But Robert's note had said to come here. To trust him one more time. I got out of the car. The night air carried the smell of motor oil and decades of accumulated dust. Somewhere in the distance, traffic hummed on the freeway. Closer, a dog barked, once, then fell silent. The key fit into the padlock with surprising smoothness, as if recently maintained. Someone had been here. Someone had kept this place ready. The lock opened with a soft click that seemed too loud in the empty street. I pulled the rolling door up, expecting darkness and disappointment. Instead, lights flickered on automatically, revealing an interior that made no sense. The space before me wasn't an abandoned garage. It was a sanctuary. Recessed LED lighting illuminated custom flooring, not cracked concrete, but some kind of specialized coating that gleamed like polished stone. Climate control panels lined one wall, their displays glowing softly. And in the center of the space, arranged with museum-quality precision, were 3 vehicles covered with fitted cloth covers. Each cover was immaculate dust-free, the fabric draping perfectly over the hidden shapes beneath. Even covered the cars suggested elegance, value, purpose. These weren't vehicles left to rot. These were treasures being preserved. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the controlled silence. The door closed behind me automatically, and I heard the soft hum of the climate control system adjusting to my presence. This wasn't a garage. This was a vault. The first cover came away in my hands like silk, revealing gleaming silver birch metal that caught and scattered the LED light like water. 1964 Aston Martin DB5. I didn't know much about cars, but even I recognized this one. The same model Sean Connery drove in those James Bond films Robert had loved. The car gleamed under the lights as if it had just rolled off the factory floor, chrome details catching and scattering brightness like scattered stars. "Robert," I whispered to the empty space, "what did you do?" The second car, when uncovered, was a 1956 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. Its distinctive doors and elegant lines were unmistakable even to my untrained eye. Deep blue paintwork, immaculate chrome leather interior that looked untouched by time. A small brass plaque mounted on the wall beside it detailed its history, its rarity, its significance. The third made my breath catch. A 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB4 deep red, like the wine Robert would order on our anniversaries. The color of celebration of special occasions, of moments marked as important. Each vehicle had a leather portfolio beside it containing documentation, purchase agreements, maintenance records, provenance papers with official seals and signatures. I opened the Aston Martin's portfolio with shaking hands. Purchase price $1.2 million. Current estimated value $4.8 million. The Mercedes $1.5 million purchase, $5.2 million current value. The Ferrari $900,000 purchase, $3.1 million current value. I sank onto a leather bench against the wall, my legs no longer capable of supporting me. The portfolio slipped from my fingers, papers scattering across the perfect floor. $13 million. Conservative estimate. My husband had left me $13 million in vintage cars while making it appear he'd given me nothing. But why? Why the secrecy? Why make me think I'd been cast aside? Why put me through the humiliation of that reading the cruelty of Jonathan's dismissal? That's when I saw the envelope taped to the wall beside a light switch panel. My name in Robert's handwriting, and beneath it in smaller letters, "Read this first, my love." My hands shook so badly I could barely open it. My dearest Susan, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've discovered what I've come to think of as my final gift to you. First, I need to say I'm sorry for the shock and confusion you must be feeling right now. The secrecy wasn't meant to hurt you, but to protect what I was building for your future. 6 years ago, when I received my diagnosis, the one I told you was manageable, the one I downplayed every time you asked about my doctor visits, the cardiologist gave me 5 years at best. I beat their timeline by a year, but I knew our time together was limited and I needed to ensure you would be taken care of after I was gone. I stopped reading, tears blurring the words. 6 years. He'd known for 6 years and never told me the full truth. 6 years of stolen time, of plans made in secret, of a future he was preparing for me to face alone. 6 years of lies. I know you're wondering about the will, about why I would leave our home to Jonathan instead of to you. Believe me, this decision caused me more sleepless nights than my failing heart ever did. Over the past decade, I've watched our son change. The ambitious boy we raised has become something different, something harder and more calculating than I ever wanted him to be. The truth is, I feared what would happen to you if I left everything to both of you jointly or even split equally. Jonathan would have found ways to control the assets, to manage your portion for your benefit, as he would say. I've seen how he speaks to you when he thinks I'm not listening, how he dismisses your opinions and needs. I've watched him become someone who values appearance over substance, status over compassion. So I created this split inheritance with very deliberate intentions. Jonathan has received what he will see as the valuable portion, the penthouse, the visible investments, the status symbols. But what you're looking at now, my love, is the real wealth. These 3 cars alone are worth approximately $13 million. The documentation will confirm their provenance, and you'll find contact information for Marcus Weatherby, my trusted dealer and advisor for these acquisitions. He can help you with whatever you decide to do with them. But the cars are just the beginning. In the safe behind the photograph of us in Venice combination is our anniversary month and day. You'll find documentation for several investment properties I've acquired over the past 6 years. All are placed in a living trust that transferred to your name upon my death. You'll also find banking information for accounts that should provide you with comfortable income for the rest of your life. I looked up from the letter, searching the walls. There, a framed photograph of Robert and me on the Rialto Bridge, laughing as a street musician serenaded us during our 35th anniversary trip. The photo I'd always loved because we both looked so happy, so free. I stood on unsteady legs and approached the photograph. Behind it, set into the wall, was a small safe. I entered our anniversary date, 06/14. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, a thick portfolio waited, its leather cover embossed with my name. The label read, "Estate of Robert Campbell, complete asset inventory for Susan Campbell." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were pages and pages of property descriptions, investment accounts, stock portfolios. Each entry is meticulously documented, each value carefully noted. But I couldn't look at it all. Not now. It was too much. The numbers swam before my eyes, meaningless in their magnitude. I closed the portfolio and returned to Robert's letter, needing to understand more than the money. Needing to understand why he'd done this. Why he'd made me suffer through that awful will reading. I know this is overwhelming, and I'm sorry for keeping all of this from you. At first, it was just a project to channel my anxiety about the future. But as the portfolio grew, I realized that revealing it prematurely might put it at risk. If Jonathan discovered the extent of these holdings while I was still alive, he would have found ways to involve himself, to offer his expertise, to gradually take control. By the time I died, he would have positioned himself as essential to managing it all. You're probably wondering why I didn't simply protect you through more conventional means, a straightforward trust, a clear will that left you the majority. The truth is, I wanted to give Jonathan a chance to show his true character. Perhaps faced with his inheritance and responsibility for you, he would rise to become the man we raised him to be. Perhaps he would prove my concerns wrong. But if he has revealed a different nature, if he has been dismissive of your needs, if he has shown more concern for his convenience than your welfare, then this legacy is your protection against that reality, your independence, your freedom. I've always believed that character reveals itself most clearly at moments of inheritance, both what we receive and what we believe we deserve. Jonathan is receiving a test as much as an inheritance. And you, my love, are receiving the means to live the remainder of your life exactly as you choose, beholden to no one. The letter continued, but I had to stop reading. My eyes were too blurred with tears, my chest too tight to breathe properly. Robert had known. He'd known what Jonathan would do. He'd seen what I'd been too blind or too hopeful to see, and he'd planned for it, protected me from it, given me a way out that Jonathan would never see coming. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the tears come. Not tears of sadness, though there was grief in them, but tears of something else, too. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief, because for the first time since Robert died, I understood that I wasn't alone. He was still taking care of me, still thinking of me, still loving me in the only way he could from beyond death. Through freedom, through choice, through the means to build whatever life I wanted. When I could breathe again, when the tears had slowed enough for me to see, I returned to the letter. There was more, and I needed to know it all. There's one more thing I need to tell you, and it's the hardest part of this letter. It's about a choice I made long ago before I met you, and the consequence I've been managing ever since. I once loved another woman. Her name was Elena, and we were young and foolish together in Carmel before I moved to Los Angeles, before I became the man you knew. I thought we would marry. I thought I knew what love was. But Elena struggled with addiction pills first, then harder things. I tried to help her, spent everything I had trying to save her. But she disappeared one day, and I thought that chapter of my life was closed. Then a year later, she found me. She was pregnant. She wanted me to know the baby was mine, but she didn't want anything from me. She was clean, she said, and she was giving the baby up for adoption. She just thought I should know I had a child in the world. That child was Jonathan. The words didn't make sense at first. I read them again and again. That child was Jonathan. Jonathan, my son, not my son. I adopted him legally a month after he was born. Elena relapsed badly after giving birth, and the adoption agency contacted me as the biological father. I was 26, unprepared, terrified. But he was mine, and I couldn't abandon him. A year later, I met you. Beautiful, kind, steady you. You accepted Jonathan as if he were your own blood, never making him feel like anything other than your son. You gave us the family we needed. I never told you about Elena because I was ashamed. Ashamed of my past, of my poor judgment, of the mess I'd created before I was wise enough to do better. But Elena never fully disappeared from my life. The letter continued, explaining years of secret support, hospital bills paid anonymously, rehab stays funded through untraceable channels, and finally 3 years ago an Alzheimer's diagnosis, a care facility in Carmel, $8,000 a month paid through a trust that now transferred to my control. Elena was alive. Jonathan's mother was alive. And she was here in Carmel, just miles from where Robert had prepared a home for me. You have a choice to make, Susan. You can continue the support, redirect it, or end it entirely. Elena is 68 now, the same age as you. She has no other family, no other resources. Her care costs approximately $8,000 monthly. I know this is a burden to place on you, along with everything else. But I couldn't bear the thought of Elena's suffering even after I'm gone. She was my first love, but you were my true love, my partner, my home, my heart for 42 years. I was never unfaithful to you, Susan. But I did keep this secret, and I understand if you can't forgive that. There's a photograph in the safe, the only one I kept. It's from before, from when Elena and I were young. I kept it to remember who I was before I became the man you deserved. Whatever you decide about Elena, know that my love for you was never diminished by what came before. You were my choice every day for 42 years. All my love now and always, Robert P.S. In the safe, you'll also find the deed to a house in Carmel. It's yours now if you want it. Fully furnished, ready for you. Go there first. Decide the rest later. I sat in the silent garage surrounded by millions of dollars in automotive art and real estate holdings, holding a letter that had just rewritten my entire marriage. Jonathan wasn't my biological son. Elena, the red-haired woman in a photograph I hadn't yet seen, was his birth mother, and Robert had been supporting her secretly for 40 years. I reached into the safe with shaking hands and found the photograph tucked beneath the financial documents. Robert impossibly young, his arm around a woman with red hair catching the sunlight. Her smile was unguarded, her eyes bright with something that might have been love, or might have been the manic energy that comes before a fall. They stood on a beach I recognized Carmel where the cypress trees met the Pacific. The photograph was dated on the back May 1977, 1 year before I met Robert, 2 years before Jonathan was born. I turned the photo over and over in my hands, trying to reconcile this young man with the husband I'd buried 3 weeks ago, trying to understand how he'd carried this secret for our entire marriage. Was I angry, hurt, betrayed? I didn't know. I felt too much and too little all at once, as if my emotional circuitry had overloaded and shut down. One thing I knew: I couldn't stay in this garage tonight. I needed space to think, to process, to decide what to do with all of this impossible information. I looked at the deed from the safe. The address written in Robert's hand, 2847 Cypress Lane, Carmel by the Sea, California. A house. Robert had bought me a house in Carmel. In the margins in his handwriting, "This is your home now if you want it. Fully furnished, ready for you. Go there first. Decide the rest later." I gathered the essential documents, the deed, the banking information, the contact number for Marcus Weatherby. I left the cars under their covers, locked the garage behind me, and drove north into the night. Carmel was 2 hours away. I had a lifetime of questions and no one left to answer them. But I had a key to a house I'd never seen and a photograph of a woman whose life had somehow become entangled with mine across 4 decades. I drove up Highway 1, the Pacific Ocean, black and vast on my left. The road curved and twisted, following the coastline, occasionally offering glimpses of moonlight on water. I'd driven this route before years ago on vacations with Robert. But tonight it felt different, like I was driving towards something instead of away from it. The anger from the penthouse had faded. The shock from the garage had numbed. Now in the dark car with only my thoughts for company, I felt something else emerging. Curiosity. And beneath that buried deep but real, a thread of hope. I thought about inheritance, about what we're given and what we earn, about secrets kept for love and secrets kept from shame. Robert had left me wealth beyond imagining, yes. But he'd also left me a choice about Elena, about Jonathan, about what kind of person I wanted to be with this power. The useless old woman my son had dismissed was gone, dissolved in the revelation of the garage and the letter. But who I would become in her place, that remained to be seen. Dawn broke over Carmel by the Sea as my GPS guided me down increasingly narrow streets, lined with cypress and pine. 2847 Cypress Lane was a stone cottage partially hidden behind mature trees, their twisted branches creating a natural gate between the house and the world. I parked on the street, too exhausted to trust my judgment about driveways and private property. The past 12 hours felt like 12 years. The will reading Jonathan's cruelty, the garage, Robert's letter, the photograph of Elena. The key from the deed opened a Dutch door painted seafoam green. I stepped inside and stopped. Every detail looked chosen specifically for me. Built-in bookshelves surrounded a stone fireplace just like the ones I'd admired in design magazines but never thought I'd have. Comfortable seating in the blues and creams I'd always preferred. Morning light poured through multi-paned windows, illuminating hardwood floors covered with hand-woven rugs in subtle patterns that reminded me of the ocean. I moved through the rooms in wonder, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The kitchen was updated but traditional, with a breakfast nook overlooking a garden where roses were just beginning to bloom. A single-bedroom cozy, rather than large, opened onto a private patio with a glimpse of ocean between neighboring properties. But it was the small study off the living room that finally broke through my exhaustion. There, above a simple writing desk, hung a watercolor painting I recognized instantly, the Venice Canal where Robert had proposed, created by a street artist all those decades ago. We'd lost the original in a move years before, and I'd mourned its loss more than I'd admitted. This was a perfect replica, as if Robert had commissioned it from my memory. I sank into the window seat cushioned in my favorite shade of blue and let the tears come. Not the desperate sobs of recent weeks, but a gentler release. Robert had created this space for me with such care, such attention to the things that would bring me comfort and joy. Even in death, he was caring for me in ways I was only beginning to understand. A soft knock at the door roused me from grief. Opening it, I found an elegant woman in her 70s standing on my doorstep, a covered dish in her hands. "Hello," she said warmly. "You must be Susan. I'm Margaret Winters, your neighbor 2 doors down. Robert asked me to keep an eye out for when you arrived." I stared at her. "You knew Robert?" She nodded, offering the dish. "He visited several times over the past few years, preparing the cottage. I'm one of the few people who knew about his project. He made me promise not to reach out until you came to claim the place." Her eyes crinkled kindly. "It's just a simple casserole. I thought you might not want to worry about cooking your first day here." I accepted the dish, oddly touched by this continuation of Robert's care. "Would you like to come in?" Over tea in the kitchen, Margaret filled gaps in my understanding. "Robert was so meticulous about getting everything right," she explained. "He'd bring photos of your home in the city, trying to capture your aesthetic while creating something that belonged here in Carmel." "I had no idea he was doing any of this," I admitted. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "He mentioned that. Said it was for your protection, though he didn't elaborate." She studied me with gentle directness. "He did say that when you finally came, you might need a friend. Someone who understood what it was to rebuild a life after loss. You've lost someone too." "My husband 8 years ago." She smiled softly. "It gets different, if not easier. Having good neighbors helps." When Margaret left, promising to introduce me to others in the community when I felt ready, I had a deeper appreciation for Robert's thoroughness. He hadn't just provided financial security and a physical home, he'd thought about my emotional and social needs as well. I spent the rest of that first day exploring the cottage more thoroughly. In the study desk, I found a folder containing practical information, names of local doctors, service providers, community resources, even a library membership already paid for in my name. And tucked into the back of the drawer, another envelope in Robert's handwriting. "For when you're ready to understand about Elena." I wasn't ready. Not yet. The envelope went into my purse, alongside the photograph, the letter from the garage, and all the questions I couldn't yet bear to answer. Instead, I unpacked my single suitcase, took a long shower in the bathroom's clawfoot tub, and slept for 14 hours in the bedroom's comfortable bed, lulled by the distant sound of waves. For the first time in 3 weeks, I slept without crying. For the first time since Robert died, I woke up feeling something other than loss. I woke up feeling curious about what came next. And that I thought as I made coffee in my new kitchen, watching the morning light paint the garden gold that was something. The useless old woman was gone, but who would take her place? That story was only beginning. I'd been in Carmel for 2 weeks when Jonathan found me. I should have expected it. My son had always been tenacious when pursuing something he wanted, and the mystery of my whereabouts combined with growing suspicions about Robert's hidden assets would have driven him to hire investigators. I was pruning roses in the front garden, my hands in dirt for the first time in years, when a luxury SUV with Jonathan's personalized plates pulled up to the cottage. He emerged, arms crossed expression, a mixture of triumph and accusation. The morning sun caught the expensive watch on his wrist, the Rolex Robert had given him. Everything about him screamed success, achievement, arrival, but his eyes were hard. "Found you," he said as I stood brushing soil from my hands. "Interesting place you've got here, Mom. When were you planning to mention it?" I kept my voice calm, despite my racing pulse. "Hello, Jonathan. This is a surprise." "I bet it is." He glanced pointedly at the cottage, his gaze cataloging, assessing, calculating value. "Care to explain how you're suddenly a property owner in one of California's most expensive coastal towns?" I unlocked the door, gesturing him inside. No point in creating a scene for the neighbors. Margaret was probably watching from her window, and I didn't want her first real impression of my family to be a shouting match on the front lawn. "I think you'd better come in." Jonathan followed, his critical gaze taking in every detail of the cottage interior. I could almost see him calculating square footage, estimating property value, comparing it mentally to listings he'd seen. The real estate agent never quite turned off. "Charming," he said, the word somehow rendered insulting by his tone. "So this is why you've been dodging my calls. You've been hiding out in a secret vacation home." "I haven't been hiding, Jonathan. I've been processing enormous changes and deciding how to move forward." I set my gardening gloves aside and faced him directly. "How did you find this place?" He smiled without warmth. I'm not completely incompetent, Mom. When you disappeared, I hired a private investigator. Basic welfare check on an elderly parent who vanished after showing signs of confusion following her husband's death. The calculated manipulation of his approach struck like a physical blow, casting me as potentially senile to justify invasive investigation, framing his control as concern. I see, I said quietly. And this investigator tracked me here. After some effort, yes. The property records were interesting reading. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Apparently, Dad purchased this place 4 years ago, but kept it out of his regular accounts, which made me wonder what else he might have hidden. My hand stilled on the kettle I'd been filling. He knew about the cottage. The question was how much he knew about everything else. Robert made his decisions about the will for his own reasons, I said carefully. The cottage was meant to be a surprise. Jonathan followed me into the kitchen, leaning against the doorframe in a posture of casual dominance. A surprise, he repeated flatly. Like that worthless garage in the industrial district, another one of Dad's surprises. My heart hammered painfully. The garage was part of his estate, yes. The garage where I saw vintage cars worth significantly more than the penthouse he left me. His jaw tightened. The penthouse that comes with maintenance fees I can barely afford since most of the liquid assets went into trust funds I can't access. So there it was. Jonathan had discovered the cars, or at least glimpsed them. The question was what he planned to do with that knowledge. Your father made his choices, Jonathan, I said, pouring water into the teapot. The penthouse and investment portfolio he left you are substantial gifts. Gifts, he scoffed. The penthouse needs hundreds of thousands in repairs that I discovered only after starting renovations. The investment portfolio barely covers my existing commitments. Meanwhile, you're living in a Carmel cottage and apparently own a collection of classic cars worth, $10 million, 15. I poured tea into 2 cups, the familiar ritual steadying my nerves. What exactly do you want from me, Jonathan? The truth would be a start, he replied. Did you know about these secret assets all along? Were you and Dad planning this manipulation of the inheritance? No, I said firmly, meeting his gaze. I knew nothing about the cottage or the garage until after Robert died. I was as surprised as you are now. This admission seemed to catch him off guard. He took the offered teacup, studying me as if seeing a stranger. Then why keep it from me these past weeks? Why disappear instead of explaining? Because I needed time to understand it myself, I answered honestly. And because your behavior after the will reading didn't exactly invite confidence or collaboration. He flinched slightly, then recovered. I was upset. Finding out Dad had essentially disinherited me in favor of you. Disinherited you, I interrupted, disbelief coloring my voice. He left you a multi-million-dollar penthouse and investment accounts worth millions more. A fraction of what he apparently had hidden away. Jonathan's voice rose. Those cars alone are worth... How would you know their value, Jonathan? I challenged. Unless you've been investigating far more thoroughly than you're admitting. He had the grace to look momentarily abashed. I have contacts in the collector car world. Made some discreet inquiries based on what little I could see through the garage windows. Of course you did, I murmured, suddenly weary of the deception and counter-deception. We sat in uneasy silence, tea cooling between us. I studied my son's face, the familiar features that echoed Robert's yet somehow lacked the compassion that had always softened my husband's expression. Should I tell him? About Elena, about his birth mother still living just miles from where we sat. About the truth of his origins that Robert had kept hidden for 43 years. Before I could decide, Jonathan set down his cup with deliberate care. There's something else I need to know, he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar vulnerability. Dad's lawyer, Hoffman, he made a strange comment when I pressed him about additional assets. He said something about medical expenses that Robert had been covering for years. Expenses that weren't for his own care. My heart stopped. He wouldn't elaborate, Jonathan continued, watching my face carefully. Said it was confidential, but I've been going through Dad's old files, the ones from his study. I found check registers going back decades, payments to a care facility in Carmel, monthly payments of $8,000 to something called Cypress Grove Memory Care. The teacup shook in my hands. I set it down before I dropped it. Mom. Jonathan leaned forward, and for the first time since Robert's funeral, I saw genuine emotion break through his carefully maintained facade. Who was Dad paying for 40 years? Who was he supporting? I looked at my son. Not my biological son, but the child I'd raised from infancy, the boy I'd loved through scraped knees and teenage rebellion and adult estrangement. The man who'd called me useless and thrown me out of my home, yes, but also the child who'd once believed I could fix anything. He deserved the truth. But did he deserve it from me, or did he deserve the chance to discover it himself, the way Robert had apparently intended Robert had left choices for me to make? This was one of them. "Jonathan," I said slowly, "before I answer that, I need you to answer something honestly. Why are you really here? Is it about the money, or is it about understanding your father?" His jaw tightened. "Can't it be both?" "It can. But which matters more?" He stood abruptly pacing to the window overlooking the garden. For a long moment he was silent, his shoulders tense, his reflection in the glass showing an expression I couldn't quite read. "I don't know anymore," he said finally. "I thought I understood Dad. I thought I understood what he valued, what he wanted for me. Then he dies and leaves this puzzle. And I feel like I never knew him at all." His voice cracked on the last words, and I glimpsed the lost child beneath the angry man. "What if I told you," I said carefully, "that there are answers to your questions, but getting them might change everything you think you know about yourself?" Jonathan turned from the window. "What does that mean?" I stood reaching into my purse for the envelope Robert had left in the cottage desk, the one marked for when you're ready to understand about Elena. "It means your father left something for us to find together," I said, holding the envelope. "But once we open this, there's no going back to who we were an hour ago." Jonathan stared at the envelope, then at me. "Is this about the woman in Carmel, the one he was paying for?" "Yes." "Who is she?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of 43 years of secrets pressing down. This was the moment. The choice Robert had left me to make. Tell him here now in anger and accusation, or take him to meet her first, let him see her before knowing who she was. No. He needed the truth first. He needed to understand before he saw her. "Her name is Elena Morales," I said quietly, "and she's your birth mother." The color drained from Jonathan's face. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair, the expensive suit suddenly looking rumpled ill-fitting as if he'd shrunk inside it. What? You're adopted, Jonathan. Your father adopted you as an infant when your birth mother couldn't care for you." The words came faster now, a dam breaking. "I met Robert a year later. We married, and I became your mother in every way that mattered. But biologically, Elena is your mother. And Robert has been supporting her care for decades." Jonathan's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. He looked like a man who'd just discovered gravity worked differently than he'd always believed. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally managed. "All these years. Because Robert wanted to protect you from pain he thought you didn't need to carry," I said gently. "Elena struggled with addiction, with demons she couldn't overcome. He thought it kinder to let you believe you were ours, fully ours, without the complication of a birth mother who couldn't be part of your life. But she is part of my life." Jonathan's voice rose with something between anger and anguish. "She's been there all along, hasn't she, in Carmel? How far away?" "About 2 miles from where we're sitting." He stood again, running his hands through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of Robert that my heart ached. "I need to see her. Now." "Jonathan, wait." "No." He turned to me with an intensity I'd rarely seen. "You said there were answers in Carmel. You said opening this," he gestured to the envelope still in my hands, "would change everything. Well, I'm ready to change. I'm ready to know the truth, all of it. No more secrets, no more protected ignorance. I want to meet my mother." I looked at him, really looked, and saw that the anger had burned away to reveal something raw and real beneath. Whatever came next, whoever Elena turned out to be in her diminished state, Jonathan needed this. We needed this. "All right," I said, reaching for my phone. "But we do this carefully, and we do it together. Elena has Alzheimer's early onset. She may not understand who you are. She may not even remember having a son." Jonathan nodded, his face set with determination. "I understand, but I still need to see her." I made the call. Cypress Grove Memory Care was exactly the kind of place Robert would have chosen, small, private, with an emphasis on dignity and comfort over institutional efficiency. The building was designed to look like a large coastal home, all weathered shingles and wide porches nestled among the cypress trees that gave it its name. The director, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, met us in the reception area. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 50, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering but somehow retained compassion. "Mrs. Campbell," she said, shaking my hand, "I've been expecting you. When the estate transfer came through after your husband's passing, I wondered if you'd visit." "This is Jonathan," I said, watching Dr. Chen's face carefully. "He's Elena's son." Dr. Chen's expression shifted to understanding. "She talks about you sometimes in her clearer moments. Though she doesn't use your name, I don't think she ever knew it. She calls you Mihijo, my son." Jonathan's hand found the back of a chair, gripping it for support. "She knows I exist. She knows she had a child, yes. Whether she understands the passage of time or what became of you," Dr. Chen shook her head gently. "Alzheimer's is cruel in what it takes and what it leaves behind. Sometimes Elena is quite lucid, able to discuss her past with surprising clarity. Other times she's lost in moments from 50 years ago or convinced she's still a young woman." "Can we see her?" I asked. Dr. Chen studied us both. "Are you prepared for this? She may not recognize you. She may become agitated or confused, and I should warn you Elena's addiction damaged her quite severely before she got clean in her 40s. She looks older than her years." "We understand," Jonathan said, his voice steady despite the tension in his shoulders. "Please, I need to see her." We followed Dr. Chen through corridors designed to feel like home hallways, past residents in common areas engaged in art therapy and quiet conversation. The facility was beautiful, expensive, exactly the kind of care that Robert's anonymous $8,000 a month would provide. Elena's room was on the second floor with windows overlooking a garden. Dr. Chen knocked softly before entering. "Elena, you have visitors today." The woman sitting in the chair by the window turned, and I saw Jonathan's breath catch. Elena Morales was 72 but looked 80. Her red hair had faded to white, with only hints of its former copper, worn in a simple braid over one shoulder. Her face was deeply lined, the kind of weathering that speaks of decades of hard living, but her eyes were the same shade of brown as Jonathan's, and when they focused on us, there was a spark of intelligence still present, despite the disease eating away at her mind. "Hello?" she said, her voice tentative. Then focusing on Jonathan, her expression shifted to wonder. Oh, you came back." "Elena," Dr. Chen said gently, "this is Jonathan Campbell, and this is Susan Campbell. They wanted to meet you." "Campbell?" Elena repeated, her brow furrowing. "Robert Campbell, are you Robert's boy?" Jonathan moved closer, his movements careful, as if approaching something fragile that might shatter. "Yes, Robert was my father. He raised me. He was a good man." Elena said, her eyes filling with tears. "I knew he would be a good father, even when I couldn't. When the drugs—" She trailed off, confusion clouding her features. I stepped forward, kneeling beside her chair so we were at eye level. "Elena, my name is Susan. I married Robert after Jonathan was born. I've been Jonathan's mother for 43 years. She looked at me, searching my face with those eyes so like my son's. "You took care of my baby. Yes, I loved him as my own. I couldn't," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I wanted to, but I couldn't. The drugs were stronger than I was. Robert tried to help me, but I was too far gone." "But you got clean eventually," I said gently, remembering details from the medical files I'd reviewed. "You've been clean for 30 years, Elena. That took tremendous strength." She shook her head. Too late for my boy." Jonathan sank into the chair opposite her, and I saw his own eyes were wet. "It's not too late. I'm here now." Elena reached out with a trembling hand, and Jonathan took it. They sat like that mother and son meeting for the first time in conscious memory, while I watched from my place on the floor between them. The weight of the moment pressed down on all of us, 43 years of separation, of secrets kept, and truths hidden, all crystallizing in this simple touch of hand to hand. "You look like him," Elena said after a long moment. "Like Robert when he was young, before I ruined everything." "You didn't ruin everything," Jonathan said, his voice thick. "You gave me life. Dad gave me a home. Susan gave me love. That's not nothing." "Robert sent pictures," Elena said, her focus sharpening as she accessed a clearer memory. "Years ago when you were small. The director gave them to me, 3 or 4 photographs of a little boy with dark hair and my eyes. I kept them until I forgot where I'd put them. But I remember you were smiling. You looked happy." "I was happy," Jonathan said. "I had a good childhood. Good parents." He glanced at me when he said it, and something in his expression had softened, shifted. An acknowledgement, perhaps even an apology. Elena's attention drifted, her gaze moving to the window. "The ocean is very blue today. My mother used to take me to the beach when I was small before she died. Did I tell you my mother died?" "You did," Dr. Chen said, gently stepping forward. "Elena, you're getting tired. Perhaps we should let you rest," but Elena's hand tightened on Jonathan's. "Don't go yet. I finally got to see you. Mihiho, my beautiful boy." "I won't go far," Jonathan promised. "I'm staying in Carmel. I'll come back and visit you if that's okay." "You'll come back." Hope and disbelief warred in her voice. "I promise." Elena studied his face, then nodded slowly. "You have kind eyes, like Robert's. You'll be a good man." "I'm trying to be," Jonathan said quietly. We stayed another 20 minutes as Elena drifted between clarity and confusion, sometimes addressing Jonathan as her son, sometimes seeming to think he was Robert coming back to her from the past. Finally exhausted, she fell asleep in her chair, and Dr. Chen gently suggested we let her rest. Outside in the parking lot, Jonathan stood beside his SUV without moving to get in. I waited, giving him space to process. "He did this for 40 years, he finally said. "Dad supported her for 40 years, kept her comfortable and cared for, and never told anyone. Never told me." "He was protecting you," I said, "and protecting her dignity. Elena didn't want you to know about her past. Robert honored that choice while making sure she was safe." "And you," Jonathan turned to look at me. "You raised another woman's son, never knowing where I came from, never demanding I be grateful or different or—" His voice broke. "And I repaid you by calling you useless and throwing you out of your home." I reached for his hand. "You were grieving. People say things they don't mean." "No." He pulled away, not in anger, but in self-recrimination. "No, that's too easy an excuse. I've been saying and doing hurtful things for years. Dad saw it. That's what his letter meant, wasn't it? That's why he structured the inheritance the way he did. He knew I'd become someone who valued the wrong things. Jonathan, he was testing me." Jonathan's laugh was bitter, and I failed spectacularly. Within hours of his funeral, I proved everything he feared about me was true. I wanted to comfort him, but he was right. Robert had indeed created a test, and Jonathan's immediate actions had confirmed rather than disproved his father's concerns. "So what happens now?" Jonathan asked after a long silence. "You have the money, the property, the control. I have a penthouse I can't afford to maintain and a growing pile of debt. Do I know if I passed or failed Dad's final exam?" I thought about Robert's letter, about the discretion he'd given me regarding Jonathan's inheritance, about the choice that was now mine to make. "That depends," I said carefully, "on what you do next." Meaning your father's test wasn't just about your initial reaction. It was about growth, about whether you could recognize the path you were on and choose to change. Jonathan leaned against his car, the fight seeming to drain out of him. "I don't know how to change. I don't even know who I am anymore. Everything I thought I knew about Dad, about you, about myself, it's all different now." "Good," I said gently. "Sometimes we have to lose our old selves before we can become who we're meant to be." Philosophical wisdom from the mother I didn't appreciate. He smiled sadly. "I don't deserve your kindness, Mom." "Probably not," I agreed, and I saw a surprise flicker across his face at my honesty. "But love isn't about deserving. Your father taught me that. He loved Elena enough to care for her despite everything she'd done. He loved you enough to try to teach you hard lessons, even after death. And I loved you from the moment I first held you before you'd done anything to deserve it." Jonathan's composure finally cracked. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around my son. Not my biological son, but mine nonetheless, while he grieved for the father he'd misunderstood and the man he'd failed to become. "I'm sorry," he choked out, "for everything. For being cruel to you, for chasing money over what mattered, for becoming someone Dad couldn't trust." "I know," I said, holding him tighter. "I know." When he'd calmed enough to speak again, I stepped back and looked him in the eye. "Your father left me a choice, Jonathan, about whether to share these assets with you and under what conditions. I've made my decision. He wiped his eyes, bracing for judgment. I'll help you, I said. But not by simply giving you money. That wouldn't honor your father's intentions or help you become who you need to be. What are you proposing? First, complete transparency. I need to see everything, all accounts, debts, contracts, commitments. No hidden liabilities or convenient omissions. He nodded. Okay. Second, professional financial management going forward. You've demonstrated that your judgment in these matters is compromised by impulsivity and overconfidence. Any funds I provide will be structured through trusts with appropriate oversight. His jaw tightened, but he nodded again. I understand. Third, you continue to visit Elena, get to know your birth mother, understand where you came from. Your father supported her financially, but she needs more than money. She needs a family. I'd like that, he said quietly. And fourth, I paused, making sure he was listening. You work with a therapist on the underlying patterns that created this crisis, not as punishment but as growth. Your father believed you could be better than your recent choices. I believe that too, but you have to do the work. Jonathan absorbed this, and I saw him wrestling with pride, shame, and a fragile hope. And if I do all this, he asked finally, if I accept these conditions and actually change, what then? Then we'll revisit the question of inheritance. Maybe in a year, maybe in 5 years. When you've demonstrated that you value relationships over transactions, substance over appearance. So I'm on probation. You're on a journey, I corrected. One your father started you on, and I'm continuing. Whether you see it as probation or opportunity is up to you. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the cypress trees surrounding the care facility where his birth mother slept. I'll do it, he said finally. All of it. Whatever it takes. Good. I touched his arm gently. Now go home to Los Angeles. Get your affairs in order. Find a good therapist. And when you're ready, come back to Carmel. We'll work through this together. As I watched him drive away, I felt the weight of decision-making settle on my shoulders. Robert had trusted me with this responsibility, had believed I could balance justice and mercy, consequences and grace. I hoped I was worthy of that trust. 2 weeks after Jonathan's visit, I finally opened the second envelope Robert had left in the cottage desk, the one marked for when you're ready to understand about Elena. I'd been avoiding it, afraid of what additional revelations it might contain. But after watching Jonathan meet his birth mother, after seeing the truth begin its healing work despite the pain it caused, I knew I needed to understand the full story. I settled into the window seat with tea and evening light and broke the seal. The letter was longer than the first, written in Robert's careful hand across multiple pages. I could picture him writing it perhaps here in this very cottage, preparing words for a future he knew he wouldn't see. Susan, if you're reading this, you've found Elena. You've learned about Jonathan's origins, and you've had to make decisions about the inheritance without full context. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for keeping so many secrets for so many years. I want to explain how Elena and I fell apart, and why I never told you the full truth. The letter went on to detail the relationship in full, meeting Elena in 1976, the car accident that killed her mother and left Elena with chronic pain, the descent into addiction. Robert's desperate attempts to save her, draining his savings on rehab programs that never quite worked. Her disappearance in 1977. Then 14 months later, the phone call. Elena is pregnant, clean but fragile, living in a facility for pregnant women with addiction histories. The baby, Jonathan, born 2 weeks later. Elena's relapse within days of giving birth, found unconscious in her room while Jonathan cried in his crib. I adopted him at 4 weeks old, Robert wrote. Elena signed the papers from rehab, crying the entire time. He deserves better than me, she told me. Promise me he'll never know how badly I failed him. Promise me he'll never have to carry the shame of who his mother really is. I promised. A year later, I met you at a gallery opening. You were looking at a photograph of the Carmel coastline, and you said it reminded you of healing. Something in those words and the way you saw beauty in broken places made me want to know you. On our third date, I told you I had a son from a previous relationship. You didn't flinch. You asked about him, what he liked, how old he was. You treated Jonathan's existence as a gift, not a complication. We were married 6 months later. You became Jonathan's mother in every way that mattered. And I told myself that the details of his birth mother didn't matter, that you didn't need to know about Elena or my failed attempts to save her. The letter went on detailing Elena's periodic resurfacing over the years. Phone calls from hospitals, letters from rehab facilities. Always brief, always painful, always ending with her disappearing again. Then, 5 years ago, the Alzheimer's diagnosis. Elena living on the streets of Carmel, confused and frightened, trying to find something she could no longer remember. I couldn't leave her like that, Susan. Whatever she'd done, whatever she'd failed to be, she was Jonathan's mother, and she was suffering. I found Cypress Grove paid for her admission, set up the anonymous trust to cover her care. She doesn't know it's me. She thinks it's some government program or charity. But I visit sometimes when I'm in Carmel preparing the cottage for you. I sit with her when she's having clear days. I show her photographs of Jonathan, though I never tell her they're from me. She's proud of him in her way. Proud that he became successful even though she had nothing to do with it. I gave him good genes, she told me once. That's the only gift I could give. The letter concluded with Robert's final thoughts on love, on responsibility, on the choices we make to protect the people we care about, even when those choices require keeping secrets. I'm leaving you this choice, Susan, because I trust your judgment more than my own. I've been managing Elena's care from obligation and guilt, but you can approach it from compassion if you choose. The trust transfers to your control upon my death. You can continue Elena's care, redirect the funds, or end them entirely. You can tell Jonathan about her, or maintain the secrecy. You can visit her or never set foot in Cypress Grove. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you fully, completely, for every day of our 42 years. Elena was my past, my failure, my regret. You were my present, my success, my joy. If you can forgive me for keeping these secrets, I'll count myself blessed even in death. Forever yours, Robert. I set the letter down, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of betrayal or anger, but of understanding. Robert had carried this burden alone for 43 years. The weight of loving two women in completely different ways. The guilt of promises he couldn't keep. The fear that truth would shatter the family he'd fought so hard to build. And in the end, he'd trusted me with all of it. I looked around the cottage he'd prepared with such care. Every detail chosen for my comfort. Every system designed for my independence. Every decision made with my future in mind. This was love. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, but deep and real and enduring despite the secrets it had to carry. I pulled out my phone and called Jonathan. "Mom," he answered on the second ring, his voice tentative. "Is everything okay?" "I found another letter from your father," I said. "About Elena. About why he kept her a secret all these years." Silence on the other end then, and I think you should read it. Not because it excuses anything, but because it explains. Your father loved your mother, Jonathan. Maybe not the way he loved me, but he loved her enough to protect her when she couldn't protect herself. "I'd like to read it," he said quietly. "Come to Carmel this weekend," I said. "We'll visit Elena together, and I'll show you the letter. It's time you knew the whole story." "Mom," his voice cracked slightly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I'm your mother," I said simply. "That's not something I know how to do." After we hung up, I sat watching the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Robert had left me wealth beyond measure, but the real inheritance wasn't the money or the property or the cars locked away in the garage. It was the choice. The freedom to decide who to be, who to help, how to use power, tempered by compassion. I was 68 years old, and I was just beginning to understand what it meant to be truly independent. The useless old woman was gone. But the woman who would take her place, she was still being written. And that story I thought as the last light faded from the sky was just beginning. Spring arrived in Carmel 6 months after Robert's death, painting the cottage garden with blooms I'd planted myself. Roses in the colors Robert had loved. Lavender along the stone pathway. Jasmine climbed the arbor leading to the small patio where I took my morning coffee. I'd settled into rhythms that felt increasingly natural. Mornings began with walks along the beach when fog didn't shroud the coast. Afternoons were dedicated to the practical matters of managing the inheritance, meeting with financial advisors, reviewing property reports, making decisions about the portfolio Robert had built. But the evenings belonged to Carmel, to this life I was building in the space Robert had prepared, but that was becoming wholly mine. Jonathan visited every other weekend now. True to his word, he'd found a therapist in Los Angeles and was doing the difficult work of understanding the patterns that had nearly destroyed him. The financial restructuring had been painful, selling the penthouse at a modest loss, settling debts, accepting the limitations of trust-managed funds. But something in him had shifted, softened maybe, or perhaps just become more honest. Today was Saturday, which meant our weekly visit to Elena. I heard Jonathan's car pull up precisely at 10. His timekeeping had always been impeccable, one trait from Robert that had survived his years of chasing status over substance. "Morning, Mom," he called through the screen door, letting himself in with the key I'd given him last month. "I brought pastries from that bakery you like." We drove to Cypress Grove together, a ritual that had become comfortable over the months. Jonathan would update me on his therapy sessions, on the job leads he was pursuing, on the slow process of rebuilding his life with intention rather than ambition. Elena was having a good day. They came in cycles now, periods of relative clarity, followed by deeper fog. Dr. Chen said to treasure the clear moments, because they would become fewer as the disease progressed. We found her in the garden, tending to a small plot the facility had designated for residents who found comfort in working with soil and growing things. "Jonathan," her face lit up when she saw him. "And Susan, I was hoping you'd come today. We brought those chocolate croissants you liked last time," Jonathan said, settling onto the bench beside her garden plot. Elena wiped soil from her hands and joined him, accepting the pastry with a smile that made her look years younger. "You spoil me." "You're my mother," he said simply. "I'm allowed." I watched them together, still marveling at how naturally this relationship had developed. Jonathan, who'd spent his adult life pursuing superficial success, had found genuine connection with a woman whose life had been defined by failure and struggle. "I brought something to show you," Elena said, reaching into the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out a small bracelet, tarnished silver with turquoise stones. "I found this in my things. I think Robert gave it to me when we were young, before everything went wrong." Jonathan took the bracelet carefully. "It's beautiful." "I want you to have it," Elena said. "It's the only thing I have from before, from when I was someone who could have been a good mother." "You can still be a good mother," Jonathan said gently. "Right now, in these moments, that counts too." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You're kinder than I deserve." "Maybe kindness isn't about deserving," he replied, and I heard Robert's wisdom in those words filtered through Jonathan's hard-won understanding. After our visit, as we drove back to the cottage, Jonathan was quiet. "What are you thinking?" I finally asked. "About forgiveness," he said. "Elena blames herself for everything she couldn't be. Dad blamed himself for not saving her. I blamed both of you for not being perfect." He paused. "I think I'm starting to understand that the inheritance wasn't really about money. It was about learning to forgive others and ourselves." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Your father would be proud of you." "I hope so." He pulled into the cottage driveway. "I have news, actually. Remember that nonprofit I was consulting with, the affordable housing developers? The ones who bought your failed project site? They offered me a full-time position, project manager for their Northern California developments. It's a fraction of what I used to make, but the trust covers basics and the work feels—" He searched for words. "It feels like building something that matters instead of just building wealth." "Are you going to accept way?" "I already did." He smiled, and it was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way I hadn't seen in years. "I start next month, which means I'll be moving to the Bay Area, close enough to visit you and Elena regularly. I'm happy for you, Jonathan. There's something else." He reached into his jacket pocket. "Marcus Weatherby called. He wanted to run something by you, but I asked if I could present it myself." He handed me a document. I scanned it, then looked up in surprise. "He wants to sell 2 of the 3 cars from the garage. The Mercedes and the Ferrari. Keep the Aston Martin since you've been driving it. Use the proceeds to establish a foundation." He pointed to the proposed foundation name, the Robert and Elena Campbell Foundation for Families in Recovery. I stared at the proposal, my throat tight. "Marcus recommended it based on statements you'd made about honoring both Dad's planning and Elena's struggle," Jonathan explained. "Supporting families dealing with addiction, providing resources for children whose parents are in treatment. It would be Dad's wealth doing exactly what he would have wanted, helping people like Elena rebuild their lives." I studied the proposal, my eyes misting. The foundation would fund rehab programs, transitional housing scholarships for children affected by parental addiction. Everything Robert had tried to do for Elena expanded to help thousands of others. "This is beautiful," I whispered. "Will you approve it?" "Yes," I signed without hesitation. "But I have one condition." "What's that?" "The foundation board includes you. And when you're ready, when you've proven yourself in this new work, you join me as co-trustee of the remaining estate." Jonathan's eyes widened. "Mom, I'm not ready for that kind of responsibility." "Maybe not today," I agreed. "But your father's test wasn't about whether you were perfect. It was about whether you could grow. And you have Jonathan. You're becoming the man he hoped you'd be." He looked away, blinking rapidly. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep doing the work. Keep visiting Elena. Keep building a life based on what matters rather than what impresses." I stood, pulling him into a hug. "The money will be there when you're ready. For now, focus on becoming someone worthy of managing it wisely." "I'll try," he promised on my shoulder. "I'll keep trying." Marcus Weatherby called the following Tuesday with an unusual request. "Mrs. Campbell, I apologize for the intrusion, but I've discovered something while doing the annual maintenance on the vehicles. There's a second safe in the garage, one I didn't know existed. It requires 2 keys to open one I have, and one that should have been with your husband's effects." My pulse quickened. "What kind of safety?" "Small custom-built, hidden in the floor beneath where the Ferrari was positioned. I only found it because there was a minor hydraulic issue with the lift system." He paused. "Robert once mentioned to me that if anything happened to him, I should look for a second lock. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant." I remembered the phrase from Robert's first letter. Something about 2 keys, one for the garage, one for the truth. "I'll come down tomorrow," I said. "Let me search through Robert's belongings tonight." I spent the evening going through boxes I'd stored in the cottage's small attic, Robert's clothes, his books, his collection of fountain pens. In the bottom of a box containing his watches and cufflinks, I found a small key I'd never seen before attached to a tag that read simply "For the Truth." The next morning I met Marcus at the garage. He'd already moved the Ferrari aside, revealing a section of floor that looked seamless until you knew to look for the subtle outline of an access panel. "Both keys turned simultaneously," Marcus explained, showing me a dual lock mechanism. "Your husband was quite specific about the installation. He said only someone who'd found both keys deserved to know what was inside. We inserted our keys and turned them together. The panel lifted to reveal a small safe no larger than a shoebox. Inside was a single item, a leather-bound journal with Robert's initials embossed on the cover. "I'll leave you to it," Marcus said quietly, retreating to give me privacy. I sat on the garage floor, the journal heavy in my hands, and opened to the first page. "This is the story I couldn't tell you while I was alive, Susan. The full truth about Elena, about the choice I made, and about what I need you to understand before you judge me or yourself too harshly." The entries began in 1978, shortly after Robert had adopted Jonathan. They chronicled his first year as a single father, the sleepless nights, the fear, the growing love for this child who hadn't been planned, but who'd become the center of his world. Then, June 1978. "I met someone tonight, a woman at an art gallery standing in front of a photograph of Carmel's coastline. She said it reminded her of healing, of starting over. Her name is Susan, and when I told her I had a son, she smiled and asked what he liked instead of making excuses to leave. I think I could fall in love with her. I think Jonathan could have the mother he deserves." I smiled through tears, reading Robert's early impressions of me, too generous, too kind, but written with such hope that I could feel his younger self reaching forward through time. The journal documented our courtship, our engagement, our wedding, all from Robert's perspective, with the secret of Elena threading through every entry like a shadow he couldn't escape. December 2nd, 1978. We married today. Susan walked down the aisle holding Jonathan, who was 7 months old and gurgling happily. She wanted him with us, wanted him part of the ceremony. "He's our son," she said. "Not my son, our son." I should have told her the truth then. But looking at her face so full of joy and love, I told myself that the details didn't matter. Elena had given birth to Jonathan, but Susan was his mother in every way that counted. Why burden her with a past that was over? God, forgive me. I chose silence over honesty. And I'll carry that choice forever. I turned pages, reading about our early years together. Jonathan's first words, his first steps, the life we built as a family. But interwoven with the joy were entries about Elena. Multiple entries documented her periodic resurfacings, hospital calls, rehab letters, brief moments of connection followed by long silences. Each time Robert sent money anonymously checked on her recovery, hoped this time would be different. It never was, until 2018 when everything changed. March 7, 2018, Elena called with different news. Early onset Alzheimer's diagnosed at 67. She's living on the streets in Carmel of all places she returned to where we began. She doesn't remember much, but she remembers having a son she gave away. She remembers regret. I can't leave her there. Whatever our history, whatever she's done, she's Jonathan's mother. She deserves dignity in her decline. The entries grew shorter as Robert's illness progressed, but they gained intensity. August 15, 2021. I've begun the inheritance plan. Splitting assets in a way that will seem cruel, but is actually protective. Jonathan has become someone who values all the wrong things, appearance over substance, status over character. He dismisses Susan's opinions, speaks to her as if she's foolish. I've heard of him. If I leave them everything jointly, he'll control it all within a year. He'll put Susan in one of those communities where inconvenient elderly parents go to be forgotten. She'll live on his charity dependent on his goodwill, which grows thinner every year. So I'm building her a fortress disguised as abandonment. Wealth hidden where Jonathan won't think to look. Independence he can't touch. And a choice about Elena that's hers to make, not mine to force. The final entry was dated February 8, 2024, 1 week before Robert died. My final entry, though, I don't know if it's truly final or if I'll find strength to write again. I visited Elena today. She was having a clear moment sitting in the Cypress Grove garden. She asked about the man in the photographs, Jonathan, though she doesn't know his name. He looks happy, she said. His parents must love him very much. They do, I told her. They've given him everything they could. She smiled then, peaceful in a way I'd never seen. Then I didn't ruin everything. I gave him life, and someone else gave him love. That's enough. Is it enough, though? Is any of this enough to balance the deception, the half-truths, the careful construction of a life built partly on lies? I won't know. I'll be gone before the truth comes out, before Susan opens the garage and finds the cars and the letter and the choice I'm forcing on her. But I believe in her. I believe she's stronger and wiser than I ever was. I believe she'll take these broken pieces, Elena's addiction, Jonathan's arrogance, my cowardice, and somehow make something beautiful from them. That's not faith in God or destiny. It's faith in Susan. In the woman who saw healing in a photograph of the coast. In the mother who loved a child who wasn't hers. In the wife who made me better than I deserved to be. If you're reading this, my love, it means you found the second key. It means you've discovered Elena, confronted Jonathan, made hard choices about inheritance and forgiveness. I hope I made the right decision giving you this burden. I hope you can forgive me for it. And I hope you know that every choice I made, good or bad, wise or foolish, came from love. Love for you. Love for Jonathan. Even love for Elena, broken as she was. The inheritance isn't really about money, Susan. It's about what you choose to do with power, with knowledge, with the freedom to decide who you want to be. I've given you that freedom. Use it wisely. Use it with compassion. Use it to become the person you were always meant to be, but that our marriage perhaps prevented you from becoming because you were too busy taking care of everyone else. This is your time, your chance, your inheritance. Make it count. All my love across whatever distance separates us now, Robert. I closed the journal, tears streaming freely, and sat in the quiet garage surrounded by millions of dollars in assets that suddenly mattered less than the words I'd just read. Robert hadn't been perfect. He'd kept too many secrets, told too many lies of omission, carried burdens he should have shared. But he loved us. All of us, me, Jonathan, even Elena, in complicated, imperfect ways that had done both harm and good. And in the end, he'd trusted me with the truth and the choice. That was his real inheritance. Not money or property, but faith in my judgment, in my capacity to handle complexity and choose wisely. 1 year after Robert's death, I stood in the cottage garden with Margaret, surveying the roses that had bloomed more beautifully than I'd dared hope. "You've made this place your own," Margaret observed. "Robert gave you the foundation, but you built something new on it." She was right. The cottage had been Robert's gift, but I'd added my touches: a reading nook in the bedroom, a small greenhouse for winter seedlings, a bench placed exactly where the sunset could be seen through the cypress trees. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan Foundation. Paperwork is final. Board meeting next week. Elena's having a clear day if you want to visit. I smiled. Jonathan had thrown himself into the foundation work with the same intensity he'd once applied to chasing profits, but now channeled toward purpose. He and his partner Sarah, an architect who worked on affordable housing design, were planning to marry in the fall. Elena would be there if her health allowed. We'd become something like friends over the past year, bonded by our shared love for Robert and Jonathan, despite the complicated history that connected us. "You look happy," Margaret said. I considered this. Was I happy Robert was still gone? Jonathan still had hard days. Elena was slowly disappearing into the fog of disease. The inheritance came with responsibilities I hadn't wanted and choices that kept me awake at night. But yes, despite everything, I was happy. "I'm free," I said finally. Maybe that's better than being happy. Free to choose who to help, how to spend my time, what kind of person to be. Robert gave me that freedom even if he did it in the most complicated way possible. That afternoon, I made a decision I'd been contemplating for months. I called Marcus Weatherby. "I'm ready to finalize the foundation. Let's sell the Mercedes and Ferrari." "Are you certain, Mrs. Campbell?" "I am, but I want to keep the Aston Martin. Not as an investment, as a reminder. A reminder of what I know. That beautiful things exist to be experienced, not hidden away. That my husband loved me enough to plan for a future he wouldn't see. And that at 69 years old, I'm allowed to drive a James Bond car if I damn well please." Marcus laughed. "I'll handle the paperwork. The proceeds should be substantial, approximately $8.3 million for both vehicles. $8 million to help families like Elena's. To give children like Jonathan a chance at better lives. To turn Robert's secret wealth into visible good. It felt right. The Foundation's first annual gala was held 3 months later in a reclaimed warehouse in Oakland. The space embodied our mission, taking what looked broken and making it beautiful and useful again. I stood near the entrance greeting guests wearing a simple black dress and the sapphire eternity band that Jonathan had found among Robert's effects and presented to me on what would have been our 43rd anniversary. "You look beautiful, Mom," Jonathan said, appearing at my elbow with Sarah and Elena. Elena wore a silver blue dress that Sarah had helped her choose her white hair, styled softly, the turquoise bracelet on her wrist. She was having one of her increasingly rare, clear days, and she'd insisted on attending. "I wanted to see it," Elena said, looking around at the transformed warehouse. "The foundation that has my name. Robert would be proud." "He would be proud of you," I corrected gently, "for letting us honor your struggle by helping others." Sarah approached with their 6-month-old daughter in her arms. "She's awake, and I think she wants her grandmother." I took my granddaughter, this child who carried Elena's name and mine, Elena Susan Campbell. A name carrying 3 generations of complicated love of broken and healed and still healing hearts. The evening unfolded in speeches and stories. People whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work stood to share their journeys from addiction to recovery from homelessness to housing, from shame to hope. Jonathan spoke last, his voice steady and sure. "My father left me an inheritance I didn't understand at first. It looked like rejection, like punishment for not being the son he wanted. But it was actually a gift, the gift of a mirror that showed me who I'd become, and a map showing who I could be instead. This foundation exists because my father loved 3 women enough to be imperfect for them. He loved my birth mother, Elena, enough to support her, even when she couldn't be part of my life. He loved my mother, Susan, enough to give her freedom and choice when he could no longer be there to protect her. And he loved my partner, Sarah, and our daughter enough to ensure I'd become the kind of man worthy of their love. The real inheritance wasn't money. It was the example of trying, failing, and trying again. It was the courage to face hard truths. It was the wisdom to know that love sometimes means letting people find their own way, even when you desperately want to control the outcome. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for supporting this work. And thank you to the 3 remarkable women who taught me what inheritance really means, not what you're given, but what you choose to carry forward. As the applause faded, I looked around the room at the life we'd built from Robert's complicated legacy. Jonathan transformed from entitled executive to passionate advocate. At Elena, given dignity in her declining years and a legacy beyond her struggles. Sarah and baby Elena representing a future built on lessons learned from the past. The garage key that had once seemed like an insult had unlocked more than vintage cars. It had unlocked truth choice freedom and the possibility of becoming someone new. The following week, I drove the Aston Martin to Cypress Grove. The car handled beautifully, its engine purring with the sound of mechanical perfection. Robert had chosen it carefully, not just for its value, but for what it represented. An Aston Martin DB5, James Bond's car. The car of a man with secrets, living multiple lives, always finding ways to protect those he loved. I parked and went inside to collect Elena. Dr. Chen met me in the lobby. "She's having a good morning," she said. "She asked for you specifically." Elena was waiting in her room, dressed and ready. She smiled when she saw me, and for a moment the disease fell away, and I saw the young woman Robert had loved 50 years ago. "Are we going somewhere?" she asked. "To the beach, the place where you first met Robert." Her eyes brightened. "I remember that beach, the cypress trees, the sound of the waves." We drove with the windows down, the coastal air whipping through the car. Elena turned her face to the sun, eyes closed, a small smile on her lips. At the beach, I helped her down to the sand. We walked slowly along the waterline, the Pacific stretching endlessly before us. "I knew a man here once," Elena said suddenly. "A long time ago. He was kind to me even when I didn't deserve kindness." "His name was Robert," I said gently. "And he loved you." "Did he?" She looked at me with those eyes so like Jonathan's. "I can't remember loving anyone. The drugs took that from me, I think. But sometimes I dream about a man with gentle hands and patient eyes. Is that him?" "Yes, that's him." We sat on a driftwood log watching the waves. Elena's hand found mine, her grip surprisingly strong. "You loved him too," she said. It wasn't a question. "I did. Very much." "Good." She nodded, satisfied. "Someone should have loved him well. I couldn't." "You gave him Jonathan," I said. "That was love too, even if you couldn't see it then." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then, "There's a boy who visits me, with kind eyes. Is he—" "Your son, yes." "My son," she repeated the words wonderingly. "I have a son." "You do? And he loves you." Tears slipped down her weathered cheeks. "How is that possible, after everything I did? Because love isn't about what we deserve." I said, echoing the words I'd spoken to Jonathan months ago. "It's about choice, and Jonathan chose to love you, just like Robert chose to care for you, just like I'm choosing to sit here with you now." Elena turned to me, studying my face with sudden clarity. "You're the one who raised him." "I am." "Thank you." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 43 years of gratitude unspoken. "Thank you for loving my son when I couldn't." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, and we sat like that as the sun climbed higher, two women connected by one man's complicated love and one child's simple existence. Eventually, Elena's clarity faded. She began to ask questions she'd asked before, to tell stories from a past that no longer quite made sense. But it didn't matter. We'd had our moment. We'd said what needed saying. When I returned her to Cypress Grove, she was tired but peaceful. Dr. Chen helped her to her room while I stood in the lobby feeling the emotional exhaustion of the morning. "Mrs. Campbell," Dr. Chen returned, holding a small envelope. "Elena wanted you to have this. She's been holding on to it for months, waiting for the right moment to give it to you." Inside the envelope was a photograph, one of the pictures Robert had sent her years ago. A young Jonathan, perhaps 4 years old, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile. On the back, in faded ink, "Your son is happy. That's all that matters." I pressed the photo to my chest and let the tears come. Not tears of grief, but of completion, of circles closing, of stories finding their endings even as new ones began. That evening I returned to the garage one final time. Not the industrial garage where I'd discovered the cars Marcus had helped me relocate the Aston Martin to a private facility near the cottage months ago. But I needed to see the space where everything had changed. The place where Robert's first letter had transformed my understanding of everything. The garage was empty now, the cars sold or relocated. Just climate-controlled space and perfect floors and the ghosts of revelations past. I walked to the center of the room and stood where the Ferrari had been, where beneath the floor Robert had hidden his final journal, his last attempt to make me understand. "I get it now," I said aloud to the empty space, to Robert's ghost, to my own echo. "You weren't just leaving me money. You were leaving me power, the power to choose, the power to forgive, the power to become someone I'd never been allowed to be. And you knew that I was strong enough to carry it. The garage didn't answer, but I felt something shift inside me anyway. Some final piece of grief transforming into acceptance, into gratitude, into peace. I locked the garage for the last time and drove home to Carmel in the Aston Martin, its engine humming beneath me like a heartbeat. At the cottage, I parked and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, feeling the leather warm under my palms. Robert had chosen this car specifically, the Aston Martin DB5, James Bond's car, the car of a man living multiple lives, keeping secrets, protecting the people he loved through elaborate plans and careful deceptions. But also, and this was what I'd only recently understood, a car meant to be driven, meant to be used, meant to carry its owner toward new adventures, not to sit gathering dust in a garage. I opened the door and stood stretching after the drive. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of the ocean and jasmine from my garden. Inside, I made tea and settled into the window seat in the study, my favorite spot in the cottage. The watercolor of Venice hung above the desk, and beside it now, I'd added the photograph of young Jonathan that Elena had given me. Past and present, loss and love, all existing together in this space Robert had created for me. My phone rang. Jonathan. Hey, Mom, just wanted to check in. Sarah and I were talking, and we'd like you to come up to the Bay Area next weekend. We're looking at houses, and we want your opinion. I'd love that. Also, he paused, I visited Elena again today. She didn't remember me this time, but that's okay. I sat with her anyway, and I told her about the foundation, about all the families we're helping. I think she understood, even if she won't remember tomorrow. You're a good man, Jonathan. I'm trying to be the man Dad hoped I could become. Another pause. Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me, for giving me the chance to change. That's what love is, I said simply. Believing in someone's capacity to grow even when they don't believe in themselves yet. After we hung up, I sat for a while longer watching the last light fade from the sky. 70 years old next month, ancient by some measures, but I'd never felt more alive. The useless old woman was gone, dissolved in garage revelations and Carmel sunsets and the hard work of forgiveness. In her place was someone new, someone stronger, someone free. I opened my laptop and began to type not a journal entry but an email to the foundation board. Ideas for expansion, thoughts on new programs, a vision for what we could build in the years to come. Because that was the real inheritance I finally understood. Not the money Robert left me, but the life he'd given me permission to build. The life I was still creating. The life that was truly, finally mine. 5 years later, the foundation gala had grown. What started in a reclaimed warehouse now filled a ballroom in San Francisco with over 500 guests and a wait list twice that long. I stood backstage adjusting my dress, deep blue, elegant, expensive. The kind of dress I never would have bought for myself 5 years ago. But I'd learned to embrace the trappings of wealth when they served a purpose, and tonight they served the message that recovery and dignity could coexist. Mrs. Campbell, a young woman, approached, clipboard in hand. 5 minutes until your opening remarks. I nodded, taking a steadying breath. Through the curtain I could hear the crowd, donors, advocates, families whose lives had been changed by the foundation's work. Among them Jonathan and Sarah with their 2 children now. Elena, who defied expectations and was still having occasional clear days at 77. Marcus Weatherby, who'd become a close friend and trusted advisor. Margaret and her friends from Carmel, who'd embraced me as one of their own. My people, my family, chosen and found and fought for. The young woman gave me the signal. I walked onto the stage to applause. 5 years ago, I would have been terrified, would have felt like an imposter, unworthy of this attention and power. But I'd learned something in these years of managing Robert's legacy. I'd learned that worth isn't something you're given. It's something you build, choice by choice, day by day. Good evening, I said, my voice steady and clear. 5 years ago, my husband died and left me a garage key. I thought it was an insult. I thought it meant I was worthless. I was wrong. That key didn't unlock a garage. It unlocked a life I didn't know I could have. And tonight I want to tell you about inheritance, the real kind. Not what you receive, but what you do with it. Not what others think you deserve, but what you choose to become. I spoke for 20 minutes, telling a version of my story that was honest but not complete. Some secrets, Elena's relationship to Jonathan, the full extent of Robert's deceptions, remained private. But the core truth was there. A woman dismissed and discarded, finding strength in unexpected places. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. Afterward at the reception, Jonathan found me. "That was beautiful, Mom." "You're biased." "Maybe," he grinned. "But it was still beautiful. Dad would be proud." "Would he?" "He left you everything that mattered, and you turned it into this." Jonathan gestured to the ballroom, to the people, to the evidence of thousands of lives changed. "Yeah, he'd be proud." Elena appeared, led by a young volunteer. She was frail now, her movements slow, but her eyes were clear tonight. "Susan," she said. "There you are." "Hello, Elena. I'm so glad you could come. I wouldn't miss it." She took my hand. "You know, sometimes I forget things. But I never forget what you did for my son, what you did for me." "We did it together." "No." Elena's grip tightened. "You did it. Robert gave you tools, but you built the house. Don't let anyone tell you differently." As the evening wound down, I found myself alone for a moment on a balcony overlooking the city. San Francisco glittered below all light and life and possibility. "You did it," I said softly, speaking to Robert's ghost, to the memory of the man who'd set all this in motion. "Your complicated, messy, imperfect plan. It worked. Not because the money was there, though that helped. And not because you forced me onto this path, though you certainly pushed, but because you believed I could handle it. You trusted me with power, with choice, with freedom. And you were right." I pulled out my phone and opened the photo album I kept private. Pictures from the past 5 years, me driving the Aston Martin down the Pacific Coast Highway, Jonathan holding his first child, Elena lucid and laughing at a foundation event, the cottage garden in full bloom, and one photo I'd taken last week, me standing in front of the garage at 1420 Industrial Parkway, now converted into the Foundation's headquarters. The building that had once seemed like an insult was now a beacon of hope. Full circle. I added one more photo to the album, a selfie from tonight, me in my blue dress, gray hair styled, eyes bright with purpose. 73 years old and still becoming, still choosing, still free. The caption I wrote: "This is what inheritance looks like. Not what you're given, but what you make of it." 5 years after Robert's death, Susan had transformed a garage key into a foundation that helped thousands. She'd turned secrets into strength, grief into purpose, and rejection into redemption. But more than that, she'd discovered something invaluable. The person she was always meant to be had been waiting inside her all along, needing only the freedom to emerge. Robert gave her the key. But Susan, strong, compassionate, unstoppable Susan, she's the one who unlocked the door. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. That inheritance isn't about what others think you deserve. It's about what you choose to build with whatever you're given. Because in the end, that's what Susan learned. The greatest inheritance isn't wealth or property or even love. It's the freedom to choose who you become. And at 73, Susan Campbell was just getting started. 1 year later, the Aston Martin handled the curves of Highway 1 like it was born to them, which I supposed it was. 74 years old, and I was driving a James Bond car down the California coast at sunset windows, down music playing something classical that Robert would have loved, but that I'd never admitted I enjoyed until after he was gone. I'd just come from a meeting in Los Angeles, a new housing development for families in recovery, funded by the Foundation. Jonathan had presented the plans with such passion, such genuine care for the people who would live there, that I'd found myself crying in the conference room. "Mom, you okay?" he'd asked, concerned. "I'm proud," I'd said simply. "Your father would be too." Now driving north, toward home, toward Carmel, toward my cottage, toward the life I'd built from the ashes of the old one, I thought about that word. Home. For 42 years, home had been wherever Robert was. Then, for a brief, terrible time, home had been nowhere. I'd been cast out, unwanted, discarded. But now home was a place I'd chosen, a life I'd created, a person I'd become. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, the same spot where I'd stopped 5 years ago on my first drive to Carmel. The night everything changed. The night the useless old woman died and someone new began to emerge. The Pacific stretched before me, endless and indifferent and beautiful. The sun was setting, painting the sky in those impossible colors that make you believe in beauty despite everything. I got out of the car and stood at the railing, feeling the wind from the ocean, breathing in salt and possibility. My phone buzzed. A text from Elena's care facility. Elena asked for you today. She was very clear, very present. She said to tell you, "Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to matter." I smiled through sudden tears. Another text, this one from Jonathan. Kids are asking when Grandma's coming to visit. They want to hear more stories about Grandpa. Also, Sarah and I have news. Call when you can. And one from Marcus. The last payment from the Ferrari sale just cleared. Final total donated to the foundation, $8.7 million. Robert would be pleased. Hell, I'm pleased. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate. I stood there, phone in hand, surrounded by evidence of connection and love and purpose. This was the inheritance. Not the money, though, that had made everything possible. Not the property, though the cottage had given me shelter when I needed it most. Not even the freedom, though, that was precious beyond measure. The real inheritance was this: the knowledge that I mattered, that my choices had weight, that I could take broken pieces, a failed marriage, a distant son, a woman destroyed by addiction, a life built on secrets, and create something beautiful from them. Robert had believed I could do it, and he'd been right. I got back in the Aston Martin and started the engine. It roared to life, that perfect mechanical purr that spoke of precision and power and care. One more hour to Carmel, to the cottage where my garden was blooming, to the study where I'd write tonight's journal entry, to the life that was wholly, completely, impossibly mine. At 74, I was done apologizing for taking up space, done asking permission to matter, done accepting anyone's definition of my worth but my own. The useless old woman was gone. In her place, Susan Campbell, philanthropist, foundation director, mother and grandmother and friend, survivor, builder, free woman. I pulled back onto Highway 1 and pressed the accelerator. The Aston Martin leaped forward, responding to my touch, carrying me home. And as I drove into the sunset, into whatever years I had left, into whatever adventures awaited, I thought about Robert one more time. Not with anger for his deceptions, not with grief for his loss, but with gratitude, because he'd given me the one thing I'd never known I needed, the chance to discover who I could be when no one else was defining me. The garage key hadn't unlocked cars, it had unlocked me, and that was the inheritance worth having. Author's note: this story is dedicated to everyone who's ever been called useless, dismissed, or discarded. To everyone who's discovered strength they didn't know they had. To everyone who's learned that the best inheritance isn't what others leave you, it's what you choose to become. Susan's journey from dismissed widow to empowered philanthropist reminds us that it's never too late to start over. That age is just a number. That freedom is a choice we make every single day. Robert gave Susan a key, but Susan, brave, resilient, magnificent Susan, she's the one who walked through the door. May we all have the courage to walk through our own doors when the time comes. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Because somewhere out there, someone is holding their own garage key, wondering if they're brave enough to use it. Spoiler, they are, and so are you.